Hey everyone, thanks for being here today. Before we dive in with Rob, I'll introduce myself. My name is Maggie Parker. I am a director of sales at Samsung Ads, specializing in CPG. And for those of you who aren't familiar, Samsung Ads is an advertising ecosystem spanning hundreds of millions of devices, from smart TVs to mobile Galaxy devices. And we have exclusive data that we use to target audiences within CTV and other digital environments, and provide measurable solutions to help bridge the gap between linear and digital. So with that, I
Yeah,
want
we
to,
actually we worked with you.
yes,
Our Schmidt's deodorant brand.
we did.
We tested that
We
out.
did,
Yeah.
which we're thrilled about. So thank you for the partnership. So now I'd like to formally introduce Rob Master, who is the VP of Media and Integrated Marketing for Unilever at North America. Pleasure to be here with
Yeah,
you,
no, I'm
Rob.
very excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome, excellent. So let's start out by having you tell us a little bit about your role and your work at Unilever.
So I've been at Unilever coming on 20 years, believe it or not. And the great thing about Unilever is the span of experiences you get. So I've worked on everything from shopper marketing and how we bring our brands to life at Target and Costco and Walmart, to being a brand marketing leader, working on Dove and Axe, among other brands. And then the last decade plus, I've worked in our media group, which has kind of, and it's been actually a great experience because it really was at the time where media as we know it is fundamentally changing and became a real competitive advantage, and was kind of no longer at the kids' table. Because for so long as a brand person, you kind of sat at the table and you had your advertising person, creative person here, your PR person, your shopper person, the list goes on. At the very back was like the media people with their big flow charts, and they would always be at the end of the meeting. And then at the end, you realize actually the majority of your money that you spend that brings that creative to life, that like drives people to retail, actually all goes through media. And so I did a rotation to media 10 plus years ago, and I'm still doing it today. So it's been an amazing experience, and so happy to be here to share that.
That's wonderful. Thank you. So I'd like to start with the upfronts coming up. With the upcoming upfront, new front planning, how
Yeah.
is Unilever approaching that, and how do you think this year will be different from years past?
So it's funny. I think one thing about the reason why I've kind of been in media for so long, again, we rotate around, and this rotation is supposed to be 2 years. It's been like 12 years, is because I think the media landscape changes so dramatically every couple of years. And so I think the upfront, which was, I think, like the last bastion of kind of the older way of doing things, has also really changed over the last couple of years. And so our approach to that is very much more fluid than I think it has been historically. It's much more of an all year round thing. We're engaging with the media networks. I think the media networks, I'll start there and then we'll go to the new fronts. Their business has fundamentally changed. And I think if I think about our approach to the upfront, today we are like meeting with the media companies like weeks, like in the last couple of weeks. So months in advance of the upfront, to talk about like, what are the key topics? Here's our brief. Here's what we're looking at, and try to just get a sense and flavor before the upfronts come. Here's where Unilever's coming in, and here's our brief, and what are you guys looking at in terms of these spaces? So we talk about brand innovation, measurement. We talk about the D&I agenda. So these are some of the topics important to us that we're like, before the upfront even happens, we're getting like lowdowns on. And I think that's an important part of our experience. The new front's obviously a little bit newer. And again, I think it's exciting. Like everyone kind of is in the new front space now, kind of playing in content. And for us as a big advertiser, it's really exciting to engage, see what's going on with this content, see the distribution model, see the kind of like what's up in targeting. And you blink, and 3 years ago, TikTok was like nowhere to be found, and today it's a global kind of like leader and enterprise that's unbelievable. That's kind of captured the world by storm. So that's the thing about this space, is constantly evolving, which makes it exciting.
Yeah, never a dull moment,
No,
which is
that's for
awesome.
sure.
That's great. Awesome. Now, I want to talk next about the rise of streaming and the growth in the video ecosystem.
Yeah.
So, we at Samsung do a lot of research on smart TV viewership trends of Samsung TV owners. We've seen, no surprise, the past 2 years, tremendous growth within
Yeah.
streaming. I think it's now 63% of overall time spent within streaming versus 37% within linear. So,
Yeah.
with this rise of streaming, this growth in the space and the changing ecosystem, how is Unilever approaching that when it comes to your
Yeah,
strategy?
so that's a good question. I think a lot of our kind of upfront process now, whereas historically it was about buying CPMs in linear television, a large percentage of our buys actually with these media companies actually goes into their streaming product.
Yep.
So whether it be Paramount Plus or HBO Max, Hulu, Disney Plus now just announced they're coming into advertising, NBC, Universal, and Peacock. A lot of the conversations with these traditional media companies, they themselves are much more kind of digitally centric. So
Yep.
we have actually been a pretty big player in that space, actually from the early days of Hulu to partnerships with Paramount Plus and Peacock and HBO Max. All these guys, we've been kind of at the front edge of all of them, kind of working with them to think out what's the best way to bring our brands to life in the streaming space. Now, what's interesting is if I think back to just the television model, I like to say that consumers had a handshake agreement with media companies and advertisers. And the idea was that we're going to get this content for free in exchange for advertising. And I think over the past like 15 to 20 years, or even more recently, I think media companies and advertisers, we've kind of like broken that handshake agreement. It's very tough to watch traditional television today with the pod experience. There's just so many spots. There's no frequency. You're seeing ads that just aren't for you. And when you have something to compare it to, which is the digital experience, which is much more targeted, frequency generally is controlled, and then of course you have Netflix, it creates a totally different experience. So we're very much bullish on streaming because it's a chance to reset that handshake agreement and work with the media companies to not just think about frequency capping and leveraging their data for targeted ads, but how do we create more innovative ad experiences with the touch of a button? So that's a big part of the streaming for us, and connected TV we're doing with you guys is being much smarter about how we invest our dollars in I say television, but it's really in video because it's like what's the best available screen to watch.
Excellent. That's great. And when it comes to streaming, there's a lot of acronyms. We've got SVOD,
Yeah.
subscription video on demand. We've got AVOD, ad-supported video on demand. Now there's the newly coined FAST services, which is free ad-supported streaming. What are some of the platforms that Unilever's leaning
We're
into
on all
most?
of them.
All of them.
We're
Okay.
on all of them. I think even the subscription-based ones that don't take advertising, we've been working with Netflix,
Yep.
Amazon, and in other kind of integrated product ways or sponsorship to find ways to engage that audience. So,
Awesome.
but again, the broad perspective is we're engaged in that space because we feel like that's where the consumer is going, particularly the younger consumer, and that's obviously an important demo for us. And they just don't understand the advertising experience that we grew up with. Like if you ask young people today, I actually teach a class at University of Wisconsin, which is my alma mater, on kind of media and marketing. And they don't even understand what the networks are. Like they just don't know what that is. When we say what are the big three networks or what are the big four networks, that's just that's a foreign language to them. And so I think part of that is just being where they are, and that's in streaming.
Yep. So true. So speaking of Netflix, they've been making news lately, announcing
Yes.
an ad-supported tier in the future. Why do you think, or what do you think is important about having ad-supported platforms for consumers, and why do you think Netflix is making this move now?
Yeah, so I think to me it's not surprising at all. I think, for a long time Netflix had this space to themselves. I mean, they had Hulu, but Hulu was really much more of an aggregator. There wasn't an investment in original content. It was just kind of this amalgam of all the networks throwing programming on there, good programming, but and so, I think for a long time they were alone in one getting subscribers, consumers, and the other part was no one was really competing with them in that space for content. And I think, that one revenue model stream works when you're just growing like that and you don't have a lot of competition. And so now I think with the likes of Paramount and Disney and, if you look at the big media companies, they're all in on this space. They must win. Because I still think everyone kind of criticizes linear. Linear still has enormous scale and impact, but the opportunity to leverage that with streaming and different revenue models puts them in a much better position. Who, by the way, now, they're not only competing for subscribers with Netflix, but they're also competing for content with Netflix.
Yep.
And that's driving up the cost of content. And when you have multiple revenue streams, you could spend more on content. But when you don't, you have one revenue stream and you're just relying on growing it internationally or trying to say people can't password share anymore. That's not a sustainable business model, which is why I think now they're getting into the advertising business. I suspect they're going to do it very clever, and I think they're going to probably be very innovative with it, and I think it's set a nice example. But make no mistake, they are in a different world now because not only are they competing, by the way, with the Disneys and the NBCs, but they're also competing with Apple and Amazon, who are the two probably most powerful companies in the world. And for them, this is kind of a bit of a hobby, like content. And so I think they're now competing for the same programming with Disney and Amazon, and I just think it's going to be a different world for them. So I'm excited because I think obviously it's an unbelievable innovative company, one of the probably the greatest pivots of all time, going from like mailing CDs to streaming. So I'm excited to see what they do next.
Awesome. Same here. And how do you think that this move by Netflix may influence other media companies and streaming companies?
So I was saying before, I think they're going to be innovative about how they do commercial modeling. I mean, I hope, because that was kind of the benchmark. So I think if you look at all the media companies, they were all saying like, we're not going to do more than 5 minutes an hour or 3 minutes an hour. And they were very specific because, they know they recognize that like they're competing now with a subscription model with no advertising. And so they know they can't replicate the linear experience because it's just not, that's just not something consumers want to do in the streaming environment. So my hope is that actually now that Netflix is in the game, that the media companies don't change the goalpost to say, okay, we were 3 minutes because Netflix was 0, but if Netflix is now 2 minutes, let's go 10 minutes. And by the way, not frequency cap. And so my hope is that just it raises the bar for everybody in terms of innovation and leveraging data, and we don't get into a situation where because Netflix is now taking ads, it gives everyone else an excuse to put like 15 minutes of ads into the pod.
I hope that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Great. Now I want to talk about something you mentioned earlier about flexibility and just sort of the future of buying cycles. We saw with last year's upfront the increased need for flexibility and the need to cancel quickly if needed. How do you think some of these changes will impact long-term buying cycles?
So I think there's the VUCA economy we're living. So VUCA is the idea. It's an acronym. I forget what it even stands for. Then it's essentially the VUCA world we're living, ever changing. I think that's here to stay. I think that's to some degree, which is one of these buzzwords, the new normal.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the biggest things for us, and I know other big advertisers, certainly price is important, but we're actually much more focused now on flexibility. The ability to understand like commodity cost, and we're a big global company. So when a war breaks out in Europe, we have like thousands of employees in Russia, and so and like the whole surrounding Eastern Europe is a huge impact to our supply chain, our overall business, and things like COVID, of course. So I think we're much more focused on flexibility, and that's something we've been clear with all of our media partners. And I think that's going to change some of the dynamics around pricing. But flexibility will be something that I think us and others will be very focused on.
Yeah, it seems like it's here to stay.
Yeah,
for sure,
I agree.
For sure. Great. Now I want to pivot and talk about consumer trends.
Okay.
So what are some of the biggest changes that you've seen in consumer behavior since the onset of the pandemic, and how is Unilever addressing those changes?
So I'm glad you brought this up, actually, because I tend to find that when big things happen, we always have these industry prognosticators or people who are like, oh, life will never be the same again. And I was unfortunately here during 9/11. And I just moved to New York City in that spring. And I remember at the time in that September, how devastating it was and how just the world was just in such shock. And I remember like there were like tanks and military people walking the streets with machine guns. And I remember everyone saying like, life as we know it is going to change. And the reality is, we now have to go through security at airport in a different way, but like humans, like we're so resilient, and certainly things that everyone guessed and said about how we were going to operate just frankly didn't happen. And I think COVID brought another set of industry people saying like, and it's clickbait to me, New York City is dead. I'm never going to a movie theater again. I'm never going back to my gym again. I'm never stepping foot in a retailer again. And I'd call bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. Like, if you look at Target's recent earnings, like people are back in the stores. Peloton, everyone thought we were going to live in a world of Peloton with Netflix. And P.S., look what's happened to Peloton, look what's happened to Netflix. So I think the reality is we're much more resilient than we think we are. And I think there's no question things will change, people will change. But the siren song that came out of this, like, I think you have to step back and really take a beat and say, let's see how like some of the more long-term changes will be. But the idea that like, my son who's 17 years old he's been to a couple movies since post-COVID. And he comes home and he's like, it's the most amazing experience. He saw like Spider-Man and one of the other kind of Marvel movies. And he's like, the theater was packed. People were cheering. Like, you don't get that like watching even on a big screen in your living room, or much less on your phone, like by yourself. And so I think, we're very much mindful of consumer trends and like taking a step back and not reacting too quickly to the siren song of New York City's dead and all these trends. I just think, something that certainly is going to change. Our consumers are certainly like shopping more online. But even if you look at like Walmart and Target, they're putting up big numbers, and Omni is a big part of that. But a lot of it is people going back to stores. So we're certainly, our focus is really about how we make our product available in whatever format they want to buy. Click and collect, ship to their house, on the shelf, however they want it. But so I think we're kind of more of a wait and see. But there's no question, I think the shopping experience, the expectation of shopping is something that's going to change forever.
Yeah, certainly. And glad to be back in movie theaters too.
Exactly.
And those reclining chairs are
Exactly.
really nice. Okay, great. So one topic that's really surfaced over the past 2 years has been the greater focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I know Dove, one of Unilever's marquee brands, has done an amazing job
Yep.
pushing the industry forward, pushing for more equitable representation in media. Can you talk about how Unilever is approaching DE&I overall?
Yeah. So I think there's a host of things that we've always done internally, and I think were elevated post George Floyd. But what I want to do, maybe just for this audience, more take an approach around media more specifically.
Sure.
So we launched a project called Project Propeller. It's managed by a woman on my team named Javon Martin. And if I think back, a lot of the challenges I think kind of Black or Hispanic kind of owned or operated media companies have is that they're smaller, and when they do an RFP, at Unilever, it's we have to streamline processes. So they kind of pit their stuff in, and they don't make it through like the first round. And in large part because we have like very specific and high standards about like brand safety and viewability and bots, and we demand the use of a certain amount of technology and ways of working. And I think a lot of these smaller players, like it's expensive to like future-proof your sites and experiences in that way.
Yep.
And if I think back to like the early days, we nurture and spend a lot of time with sites that are now big, like Snapchat or Twitter. I mean, I remember actually sitting, not to name drop, but like sitting in a room with Sheryl Sandberg like 15 years ago, talking about like looking at the feed and like talking about how do we do advertising. So it's like we spent that time with them, and so now we're spending a lot more time with these cohorts, Hispanic and Black-owned media, to try to make sure they understand what are the expectations, and not just like get an email back saying you do this, this, and that. It's like we have agency resource, Unilever resource, helping them get up to standards on Unilever, because we know if they can get Unilever standards, they're going to actually get everybody's standards, and it's actually a huge win for them. So we're investing in that from a media perspective with this Propeller. I think the other part of it is, there's that which is like small owned, but also just anchored. So much of it's about the audience and consumer. So we're spending a lot more time on our content development and thinking about distribution with content with these cohorts, whether it be Hispanic, Black, LGBTQ+, et cetera. So it's a huge focus for us. It's always been one, I think, for Unilever, but certainly it's been amplified over the last probably 18 months. And I think ultimately, like the insights are very unique. So we have this thing called the Dove Crown Coalition. So people may not know this, but in many states, not in 14, because we passed this legislation in 14, but we helped with legislation to pass it. It's actually legal to discriminate people based on their hair. So you could send them home from school. You don't have to give them a job just based on your hairstyle. If you have dreads, if you wear a certain texture of hair a certain way, I mean, it's actually remarkable. So we took that up. It's called the Crown Act. Dove hair, it's the crown. And we worked with 14 states. California was the first, and 13 states followed. Actually passed the House of Representatives, and now we're waiting for the Senate to try to make it legal. But I, like myself, talked to people. Like, I'll never forget this guy, University of Texas student. He got a job at a fast food restaurant, and they said, you got the job. You just, before you start, you have to cut your hair. And his hair wasn't that unusual. I mean, that's the crazy thing is, and they said if you don't cut your hair, you don't get the job. And so it's just, so I think that's something that we've really gotten behind. But again, it's based on insights and understanding. And I think we're doing that across a variety of different cohorts to make sure we're connecting the content and then the distribution to connect with those consumers.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Um, Now, there's been a lot of talk over the past couple days about retail media networks.
Yes.
And all major retailers are now entering the space: Walmart, Kroger, Target. Can you talk about how Unilever is working with these partners, and what are some of the unique opportunities or challenges with partnering?
So I think, listen, the thing about the retail environment is they have amazing data. Whether it be their loyalty cards or now the way they can leverage credit cards used at their stores. And so I guess they kind of looked at media companies in general, particularly digital media companies, and they saw, I mean, just go look at like, market caps on the likes of Pinterest and Twitter, and of course, look at Facebook, and you look at those market caps and you look at the number of employees they have and the offices and like real estate investment they have to have. And then you look at Kroger, CVS, look at those market caps, and then look at like the number of employees, the real estate business they're in, the margins that are in retail. And I think they looked at it and said, hey, we have great data, and like people are shopping at our stores. We're much closer to the connection. People buy Facebook and Pinterest to drive their brands to Walmart or to Amazon. And so I think, Amazon really set the bar on this space. And I think Walmart, Target, they've all kind of begun to follow. And I think, the big opportunity is to leverage that data and leverage that experience. Of course, the challenge for them is, Google is a company who developed the search technology with 25 years of the greatest engineering talent in the world. And I think that doesn't happen overnight at a Walmart, Target, Kroger, et cetera. So I think for them, the challenge is going to be how do they shift to become media companies, leveraging that retail business, but really standalone media companies that earn our dollars with great app products, great experiences, leveraging that data because having data is one thing, actually leveraging data is another. So I think it's a journey that they're all on, and we're certainly partnering with a number of them on, just like I talked about Project Propeller, like we're working with the retailers as well, saying these are the expectations, these are the standards now that you're a media partner.
Awesome. Okay, just doing a quick time check here.
Do you have another good one? I mean, not that your other
I
questions
actually have a
haven't
few
been
more,
good.
but we.
Q&A?
Yeah, you want to do some Q&A?
Yeah, yeah.
People will ask questions, I promise. Don't worry about it. Plus, look, see, I was right. I said these seats would fill out because you had a good time slot. You had a good time slot too, but they were drunks. So they went out the night before. Yeah, but they're all going to talk to you afterwards. Don't worry about it. Yeah, always pick the second. Always pick the second slot if you can. And now, oh yeah, Samba, what's up? Yes.
What's up?
So clearly you're diving into CTV and streaming, and I'm curious how you're transacting and targeting in the space. So you've been spending a ton of money in the linear TV space against probably age, sex, demographic,
Yeah.
audience guarantees. And today, companies like Samsung, companies like my own company,
Yeah.
there's data available for you to isolate unreached audiences and target those kinds of, to make it more complementary
Yeah.
and reactive to the TV schedule. I'm just curious if your brands have been experimenting in that area yet in the streaming space.
We have actually. I think we did that with Samsung.
Yeah.
A group of data. So,
Yeah.
the key area in CTV is going to be around measurement. I think we're facing a bit of an industry potential crisis around measurement. Obviously, my hope is that the investment in Nielsen, Elliott Management invested in Nielsen will like put them back on track. What we like about companies like Nielsen are they're an independent research-first company. A lot of companies are getting into the measurement space with whether it be Paramount, you guys, and your software companies who also, by the way, sell media in many cases. So I think, so we're piloting a number of players. I mean, I just was at the agency last week, and we had like an hour conversation just based on the CTV pilots we're doing. And the other part about this, like, what's the currency? Like, the idea of transacting on different currencies with different partners is a bit frightening. I think for the industry, because how do you guys do yield management in a world where there's like everyone's kind of like paying on a different currency across the board? So I think this year we're doing a number of pilots in the upfront process as well as with the CTV, like more direct CTV players. And then, by the way, you layer on top of that the cookie, the deprecation of the cookie. And so that was a different meeting a month ago where we focused on all the pilots we're doing in the cookie deprecation issue. So I think measurement is really going to be like the issue for the second half of 2022, and we need to get started now because 2023 is coming, both a different upfront as well as a cookieless environment where I think, you know, certainly we want to leverage our first party data, but we're not built for first party data yet to scale in a way that we can live without cookies. I mean, we're getting there, but I think that's a big issue.
Let's see. I'm gonna. Oh gosh, oh, so many. All right, we go here, then Kim, then I don't know your name.
Mine, hi Rob. It builds where you think it needs.
Yeah. You're good.
What are you able to disclose your measurement partners? Who you're using? Who you're testing it?
I mean, it's a laundry list of players, so it's just probably not helpful for me to. But yeah, there's a number of them. It's a long list, both here and actually and globally.
Hi, Rob. Kim Ryder from Samsung Ads.
I like him.
Unilever's been just an incredible leader in the sustainability space
Yep.
and climate change. Can you talk a little bit about how you're approaching that message and what the balance is between acquiring new customers, awareness, all of those other important KPIs versus getting the messages out about sustainability?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think actually that's going to be one of the biggest opportunities and challenges for brands moving forward is the balance between brand equity and purpose. Now, ideally, your brand equity is linked to purpose, but to some degree, there's there's things that the Dove ingredients and product does to your skin that's different than the purpose work that we do for girls' self-esteem. And so I think balancing purpose and equity really will be the next great kind of like challenge for brand marketers because people care about the purpose of your brand and like where it's made, what you stand for. I mean, we're living in a world where people expect brands to have positions on social issues, political issues, and so I think you have to make sure you don't get too caught up in the purpose versus like, hey, our product cleans really well. It does amazing things to your hair and leaves it shiny. Or Hellman's like is the secret ingredient to like anything you eat. And that's different than, make food not waste. So I think that's a big one. It's a tough one. And I think, a brand like Dove, I think does it really well. We highlight what we stand for as a purpose, and we have amazing advertising that's really about the product. I think Chick-fil-A is another product, I think, brand that does it really well. Like they have that red couch, and it's like there's really nothing about the food. It's about the experience and what they stand for. And then in that same music, look and feel, you have like.
It was not me. No.
Oh, so in Chick-fil-A, you have that amazing food shots and beauty shots of the food and how tasty it is. And so I think balancing that, I think, will be the next kind of great challenge for brand marketers. So it's a great question.
Wait a second. There's too many questions. So I got you, and then I got her, and then Tom.
I'll try to keep my answers shorter.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. You're good. No, this is great. I mean, it's the break. Don't worry about it. They've had enough to do. You go first.
Darren Finney from Sinclair Media Networks. Question, you were talking earlier about linear still having a lot of scale and
Yes.
impact. So as you're going through the upfront, how do you find the sweet spot on how much media weight and investment to put towards that still has tremendous value versus CTV, streaming platforms, to get that value as well? Where do you find that?
I mean, that's the billion-dollar question, I think. I think that we're constantly grappling with. We have a host of modeling that we use to try to make sure that, again, around it goes this idea of frequency capping. We're looking at some audience demographics, like younger people just aren't necessarily outside of sports tuning in to linear television as we grew up on. And so I think part of that's just getting very much more specific on understanding what's the job to be done for the brand, who are we targeting, and then leveraging like an array of media platforms to get there. And so, listen, we know when we still turn on television, we see results. Like, everyone, that's another thing. Everyone said TV's dead. I mean, TV's not dead. We know when we put on Hellman's advertising, like on television, on linear television, we sell more Hellman's. Is it the same impact as it had maybe 5, 10 years ago? No, but it's still meaningful. So I think it's a continuous kind of modeling that we're looking at, but so much is based on the product, the campaign, and the consumer.
I mean, to be fair, Hellman's is delicious on anything.
It is.
Hi, friend.
Hey.
I loved the announcement yesterday about the degree metathon.
Yes.
Would love to know because it's a passion for you guys, DE&I, and I think it's been an underserved community actually. So I love that you guys are supporting the handicapped community. So talk to me about like how that came to fruition, and then from a media standpoint, I'm personally curious, what are you doing to help promote it?
Yeah. So the question was around, we launched this whole Metaverse, like a marathon. And the degree brand source is about this mission is really about doing more. And so often people with handicaps do not have the opportunity to do more. And so we made a host of products and experiences to enhance that. And so we're kind of in the metaverse, and I see I'm running out of time.
Don't worry about it.
So doing this whole man. So a lot of it, I mean, again, this is like a trial and pilot experience. So we're certainly like promoting it with some various media partners, nothing major across a variety of different handles in social media, just to get, again, running water through the pipes a little bit of how this experience works, how the technology works, how people are engaging with the technology. So I think that's kind of we're doing it. It just happens to live so perfect with our brand mission for Degree. So and that's like probably another siren song of like everyone's now talking meta and NFTs, and I'm not sure if anyone tried to buy an NFT, which I did a couple of weeks ago. I mean, it is like you need like a PhD to buy. And by the way, I'm giving away like such personal information, the last 3 digits of my social security number, like to like these websites I've never heard of before. So I think that's another space, and I think we live in a bubble of like our world where once you look at like an NFT article, it's like all you get is NFT articles or meta articles. And you think, God, everyone's talking NFTs and meta. But you go out to like Main Street and like very few people are really talking about meta NFTs. So I think that's another one we have to be mindful of.
Yeah, no, I don't. I just take screenshots of all of your NFTs and just say they're mine. All right, this was awesome. We're gonna close because we have a break, but I do want to say one thing just about Unilever, and it's not a question; it's more of a comment. I think one thing that Rob touched on, sort of, but it's important to know for all of you in the audience is like, despite all this crazy stuff that's happening with our industry, whether it's measurement and all these crises that you're dealing with, which is nice because it keeps us all employed. Like you guys never stop though with this connection to the consumer. Like I've never seen Unilever move away from an idea because we can't really measure it. We can't do this. I think you're making those decisions. I just think that's important because it's even with the gaps that you guys have, not you, but just us as an industry, you don't stop trying to find ways to connect to your consumer. Where you will run into, as for those of you who are talking to brands directly, you will find people who are like, well, we can't measure it through MTA or MMX, like we don't want to do it. And Unilever is one of those brands that keeps trying those ways. And your TV example is a perfect example. Like why would you remove TV? It definitely works.
Yeah.
Not to the same, can't measure it the same, but it doesn't matter. Like you know it works, and more importantly, you know why you need to connect, or sorry, you know where to connect to your consumer.
As I said last year, I think everything we do, we're measuring or trying to get key learning. Right. But many things we do is certainly far from perfect measurement. It's just you want to walk away from experience saying, what did we, so the KPIs for this metaverse thing are very different. Like we're not looking at necessarily like the traditional brand lifts or sales, but we're looking at like other KPIs around we ran water through pipes. How did the technology work? How did the brand show up? How did it look? What like the social commentary about it? Because we take that to the next time we do it and say we try to tweak it, and then you start layering in once there's a better measurement in place. So
awesome. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Maggie.